Everybody, welcome back to Eggs, the podcast. Today's special guest is marketing consultant Ondar Tarlow. Ondar, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
I'm great, man. Nice to see you, Ryan. Nice to see you, Mike.
Yeah, thrilled to have you, man. Yeah. So I guess let's kind of start a little bit about at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about who you are and why we're talking today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a marketing consultant. My background has been marketing from large campaigns to digital campaigns, social, really across the board, financial services, including banking, real estate, wealth management. And then also more recently, I've also been engaged from a consulting standpoint for both action sports as well as content creation with a company called Zero Zero Nation out of the UK. And then also domestically with a group called Fastlane Drive, which is an exotic car club, business networking, and philanthropy. We have 23 chapters internationally, including Monaco, Paris, and Tokyo, and then 20 domestically.
Nice. That sounds like a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun.
Can you let's go back to your first gig. What did you do to get into what you're doing now? Was it college kind of spurred you into the right direction and it kind of just led you in that direction, or did you stumble into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was always interested in marketing from the standpoint of brands. I was always interested in brands. It always fascinated me when I was young, but I really know what it was all about and what marketing was all about. When I went to university, I was really focused on business and psychology. And I think, as we know in marketing, business and psychology turn out to actually be a pretty good mix. I had to focus on psychology to get my bachelor's degree in the right amount of time that I wanted to. Business was going to take a little longer. And so I focused on that. And then from there, really kind of, as many of us do, right, it kind of back-ended into a career on the mortgage banking side and worked for some notable national companies. And then I could see an opportunity, right, as far as marketing was concerned, with a company that was growing rapidly. And so in those days, they didn't even call it digital marketing, right? And you couldn't even take it in college. So this was after my bachelor's. I looked and said, okay, I got to get into this. What am I going to do? So I took extension courses at UCLA, and they were called e-business, right? And e-commerce was the only thing you could do. And I had to drive like halfway across the city to get there. And I mean, it was fascinating to me. And so when there was that opportunity, I struck at it and was able to get into a career as far as marketing was concerned. Mortgage banking then developed into banking, did some pretty exciting campaigns on a national basis, and then moved on from there.
Yeah, I love that. Well, pretty funny transition, though, from finance into action sports and all this other stuff. So how did that pivot come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, action sports and racing and exotic cars have been my passion since I was a child. And, in marketing, when you know how to market, you can cut across verticals, right? You don't need to be stuck in specifically one. As an example, of financial services. I dabble still in financial services, but that pivot and that opportunity came along. And so again, I grabbed it. When opportunities come along, you have to take a look at it and say, okay, is this the right time, or do I have enough information? And sometimes you just have to go for it. And that's exactly what I did. I saw the timing, saw the opportunity, moved ahead, and utilizing my background in marketing across the board with digital marketing, branding, performance, social, fit perfectly with both the action sports side as well as the exotic car club side, because both leverage those universes as far as being able to get the word out, build the brand, and drive business.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Well, and especially it's been really interesting. It seems like over the last, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years now, maybe even a little more, that it seems like there's been a real rise in the action sports stuff. And maybe it has to do with my awareness of things. I mean, back in the olden days, we had clothing companies and things like that we ran in like the mixed martial arts world and things like that. So we kind of were with that crew for a while, and then, dirt bikes and motocross and all that stuff for a while. But I know I know you happen to be a giant fan of F1. And for me, I hadn't really paid that much attention to F1, but then Netflix did that series, that Drive to Survive thing.
Yeah.
And after watching that first season, I was hooked immediately on that stuff. And then since then, now, and again, maybe it's just an awareness thing, but now I see it everywhere, right? And it seems like it's hitting the mainstream much more than it used to, at least here in the States. obviously we have a lot of friends in Europe and stuff, and F1 for them is life, right? So it's been around for a long time. But I mean, in the States, it seems to be moving into a new level of awareness. And, you're seeing that also maybe in soccer. World Cup was a
I
bigger
was just
deal
going to
these last
reference
couple
that. It's
times.
like soccer's the same
Yeah, I mean,
vibe.
there's a lot of
Totally.
things that are
Yeah.
suddenly kind of seeming to come to the forefront in this country that were never that big a deal. And so I wonder if you just have any perspective on, what you think is happening. Is it in fact growing, or is it just awareness? Like, where are we at with the action sports world?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I love how you started it off with F1 because, again, that's another passion of mine. So, action sports is really taken on like a life of its own, right? I mean, when you have the likes of Monster and Red Bull, I mean, just take those two companies alone and to see the growth that they've had because they've tapped into people's passion. And I think that's a key as far as a brand is concerned. One of the things that, you do when you're a brand marketer is you look at your brand and you say, okay, if I had an ad out, right, and I just simply switch the logo, would it make a difference? And if it doesn't make a difference, you're doing something wrong. And so when you look at Red Bull and how they started with this like subculture, and then you look at Monster, how they move forward with the entire, action sports side and motorsports side, it is when people see a brand that has a similar passion that they do, they're gonna go all in. They're gonna figure out how they can be aligned with it, whether it's from apparel or whether it's from events or a combination. And so I think that those two in particular, as far as action sports, have done amazing things. You can add on to that, obviously, Oakley, which has been just a juggernaut for a long time. And all, actually right here in Southern California, both, of course, Monster and Oakley. So that's, I think, how the action sports side has really evolved from SoCal. And when you look at F1, I've been following F1 since the early 2000s. I don't want to try to date myself too much, but I always, I look younger than I am. But F1 was one of those things where it was exciting. You would have to travel, right? It's always about travel, and travel is kind of one of the fun things, but it's not necessarily always accessible for people. Like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go to London and go to the Silverstone race. Like, that's not easily accessible. I'm going to go to Monaco, or I'm going to go to Japan. If you had the means or you had the passion, you could figure it out, which I did at an early age. Had the passion, not so much the means. You'd go there and you'd see the excitement. And the excitement, the race was part of it, but everything leading up to the race, that entire experience aspect to it and the lifestyle is really what hooks people. But again, that accessibility is what was lacking in the US. And so when Drive to Survive came about, right, it was right in your living room. You could see behind the scenes. It wasn't just cars going by quickly. It was stories, it was characters, and people got into it. And the thing that was lacking in the US was races, right? Was the accessibility, right? When Drive to Survive started, I believe there was only Austin. That was
Yeah,
it.
just
Austin,
Circuit of
Texas,
the
right?
Americas or whatever it's called.
Yeah, exactly. And then they moved and they added Miami, and obviously they added Vegas, and they have Montreal, and they have Mexico City. So now you've got 5 races in North America. So that accessibility was a huge difference. Bringing it into the living room, to your point with Drive to Survive, made it real for people, and they just jumped on board. And now, from a brand side, I was reading something the other day. It was pretty fascinating. Is, let's say 5 years ago, 80% of the sponsors were either international companies or they were European based. Now it's an actual flip flop. That percentage now is US based companies, the likes of HP and others and Oracle. And so these are huge contracts, 80, $100 million a year. They're not going to pay for something that's not working.
Yeah. No, it's true. Well, and it's such an interesting thing, especially around that accessibility component, because I mean, and I will just say, just from my very limited experience as a first round person, somebody who's just getting into this, my experience with F1 when they first came to Vegas, for example, was I stayed there the week before and I got to stumble around their track because it was in the way of everything. So that's how much exposure I got to F1. But even just seeing the track lit up at night and stuff like that, because they were preparing for the race the following weekend. It was, I mean, just the whole experience is cool. So like, as you're talking about this and I'm thinking about, how people can get involved with this now, obviously, and maybe it's like this everywhere, I assume it is, but it's a little bit of a lifestyle of the rich and famous kind of thing. So it's kind of an aspirational thing. It does cost, pretty decent money to go do these things. And so to your point, travel before and stuff like that would have been hard, but it seemed to me that the race was almost secondary to all that lifestyle stuff. Like, cool, there's a race going on, but look at all this stuff we get to do and the people we get to meet and the time we're going to have, and all that stuff. And so it seems like more than just the race itself, it's to your point, the lifestyle or the culture here. And I think that that's what people are aspiring to. So if you can't afford it, you watch it on Drive to Survive. If you can't afford it, maybe you buy cheap seats somewhere and you go, find yourself a little corner that you can't really see the track or whatever. But but there's ways to do it for less money, or just get a hotel in a high building, and or those kinds of things. But it's I don't know, I think it's becoming more and more accessible to the common man. But at the same time, there's kind of this air around it that I think is really kind of nice. It almost makes me think of like a high tech Kentucky Derby or something. It's like, there's a horse race going on, but it's really about the cool dresses and the rich people doing their things and the cars, and it's all this other stuff going on too. So it's kind of an interesting world.
It's true. And, like you were saying with Vegas, and you see the lights because it's a night race. I mean, that is like, and when they decided to have, and you knew it was going to happen, Vegas and F1, this is the biggest things that both of these international phenomenal entities had ever seen. Vegas has hosted incredible events, nothing like Formula One, where you have, roughly a 5-kilometer track going around the strip and down the strip. And you have, race cars hitting 215 miles an hour down Las Vegas Boulevard. Nobody had ever seen it. Of course, it pissed off the locals a little bit when they were building it, but it has brought a tremendous amount of revenue to the city. And, you see the same things all over the world. I mean, the race that was just yesterday in Brazil, they've been having a race in Brazil for, probably 30 plus years. Now on the calendar, you've got races that are going all the way through December, where just a few years ago, there wasn't any races even in November. So it is an incredibly long schedule for these drivers and these teams. And you think about the equipment, right? The branding, everything, logistics is like insane, because they're traveling around the world, for roughly 10 months out of the year, potentially even longer. And that's really unique. But to your point, Ryan, as far as the experience and the lifestyle aspect, we all think of like Monaco and its glamour and its models. And, now you kind of bring the brand into your living room. And then you're getting this entire new demographic. So my daughter's 14. This is a demographic that's now interested in F1 and follows it. They never had any interest before, because with the new ownership, or recently new ownership of F1 with Liberty Media, they turned it into, they made characters, right? These are, at this time, young, good-looking guys. I do think there should be women in the sport, but young, good-looking guys who are making, millions of dollars a year and racing Ferraris around the track in Monaco and Singapore. I mean, doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, well, and it's full on WWE. Like, I mean, it's like you watch these things and they build all the drama around these characters and stuff like that. And so you really get into it, and it did change it. But so to take it back to your strength and lifestyle marketing and all this thing, I think the F1 is a great exemplar of this, which is, I mean, there's the race component, but then there's the marketing around it. There's, being able to touch people where they are, whether you're, millionaire and you can go do the full F1 experience, or if you just have to, learn about it on TV, now the exposure is such that you can watch the races and you can be a part of it at home, just like any sport, like, NFL football or whatever.
Yep.
It's expensive to go to a football game also, but you can stay home and watch it, and it's a good experience. It might even be a better experience in some cases. And so, so it's interesting how just marketing has been able to, I guess, sort of extend the reach of these sports. And now seeing them here in the States, I think, is an indicator of how you mentioned earlier, like tapping into people's passions. It's like, for the longest time, marketers were just trying to move a product or whatever. And it seems like with these kinds of things, you're really moving into an era where we are trying to tap into more people's intangibles, and it's less about, the physical product. I don't need to have an F1 car in my yard. That would be cool. But I can feel like I'm a part of F1 without that.
You mentioned Red Bull in particular, and Red Bull is one of those companies that sticks out to me, because they go in and they go in these sub demographics that doesn't make sense to anyone else. Like, they did a b-boy competition in Japan yesterday or over the weekend, and that's a whole demographic that people don't really realize is there. Breakdancing and all that stuff. They actually still do a thing called the Red Bull 3 style, which is a DJ competition, and they do a worldwide DJ battle, and bring the whole community together. And the fact that they reach out to those smaller communities, those niche communities, and those are what, like, those two examples right there are my world, like the DJ battles and the b-boy
Mm-hmm.
world and all that stuff. It's what I follow. And the fact that they go into those sub demographics and hit those people, it just says, it says who they are, and what they do is like for the people, not just for, like NBA players or, I love that they get in the community and work with people like that. Red Bull in particular is the one that stood out to me. So thanks for bringing them up.
Yeah, I mean, Red Bull is a great example because they had a plan, right? I mean, it's not necessarily really clear to most people. They look at it and they look at it as a drink, and they're doing these like unbelievable, global level stunts,
Yeah,
right?
like
To
the guy
create
jumping from space in a
exactly.
parachute and stuff. That kind of thing is, people will see it on Instagram and talk about it for a week. It's like, you see what Red Bull just did? The guy was
Yeah.
jumping trains on his bike. And what's going on? It's like, it's really cool how they do that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like it pushes the limits of like
Yeah.
humans and sport as well, which attracts obviously attention and creates that kind of brand level that's very difficult to duplicate. So
Uh-huh.
that differentiation is I think is really key for Red Bull. And to your point on the DJ side, right? Red Bull really started off. My experience with Red Bull and taking a look at kind of what they did early on is they decided they were going to go into that subculture of like DJs and nightclubs like at a global level and build up this interest, for something that, no one had any interest in or had any clue on before. And then from there, they just expanded out. So it's an interesting study and brand is to like zero in and figure out where you can potentially create an audience that never existed before. Right.
Exactly.
And then how do you elevate that audience and then expand it, to people who thought, oh, I don't need an energy drink that costs $4 a can at that point.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because like some of the things they do are so hyper niche, they've actually kind of almost created sports out of things, like the Flugtag, for example.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there are probably some people doing this, in weird backwoods parts of the world, and that's something they just did for a good time. But nonetheless, you've got these, power, whatever it is, or powerless flight challenges that they do. But I mean, there's a whole industry around it now. Now, people are building these machines, and it's been going on for 20 years now. And but that was something kind of just made out of nothing, or made out of something so hyper niche you couldn't even imagine. And now it's got sort of this broader, or more broad appeal, I should say. So
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
it's very true. And, something that we've done with Zero Zero Nation on the action sports side of Zero Zero Nation is, death diving. I'm not sure if you're familiar with death diving.
Mm-mm.
So death diving is kind of like cliff jumping on steroids, and it's been kind of this subculture sport that's existed in the world and actually started in Norway. And there's actually a death diving league. It's called the Duds League, which Duds means death in Norwegian, and it's caught on. And so they just had a global championship series that cut across multiple continents this year. Our team, the Zero Zero Nation team, was actually the only one that didn't have a sponsor. So Monster actually sponsored the entire event, and then there was various sponsors like Pepsi, et cetera, for individual teams. Our team had the world record holder as far as height is concerned, and just phenomenal champions. And so we were invited to go because of what we could bring together in terms of the amplification that we have on social and what we have from a culture standpoint. But to your point, this is like early as far as a new sport is concerned, but it's really like caught on like wildfire. And it again is reminiscent of some of these things that, a Red Bull or a Monster and others have done, early on. And it's pretty wild.
Yeah. Um, so you kind of focus on data. You're data driven on a lot of your marketing campaigns. Can you maybe talk about how an up and coming business or a mom and pops can actually use data to enhance their marketing and build their brand?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's start off with, let's say micro businesses, right? Let's say, one storefront or they're just online. So there is a huge amount of data that's available, but first you got to start off with understanding what it is and what is actually meaningful, what's actually going to move the needle. So for those kind of smaller, very small micro businesses, first thing to do is really take some classes, right? Online, LinkedIn, Google, others have free courses that break down the types of performance marketing that's important and how you track it. So if you're going to be doing and dabbling in Google ads before you spend any money, you need to learn about it and figure out, is that where your possible audience is? The same thing with Meta. If you're going to be on Facebook or you're going to be on Instagram, you need to learn how these things work. There's a tremendous amount of data. Some of the data is consistent across platforms and some of it is not. And so you need to go into it eyes wide open, because you can spend a tremendous amount of money in a very short period of time. It's kind of like Vegas. But if you know what you're doing, you can actually get something out of it, and you can see performance. You can see data drive performance. Now with AI, and obviously there's no way we could have this conversation about data and not talk about AI. And it's like every minute of the day, everybody is talking about AI. But when you look at it, you can utilize AI in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit larger of a budget to kind of figure out how you can utilize it from a data perspective. So we'll talk about the data side. So in my recent past, in the past actually probably 3 years, I've worked with some really strong teams on the business intelligence and data side. So if you're a marketer, you need to have someone on your team who is completely focused and an expert on data analytics for sure. And you need to partner with, if there's additional data teams that are on the IT side, or it could be contained within marketing or other businesses, they need to be your best friends, because that is where the performance is going to come from, because the data and the accuracy of data now is unheard of. But you got to set up definitions. You got to be aligned on what those definitions are as far as the data is concerned and what's important to people. And from there, you need to build campaigns. So let's talk about something simple like an email marketing campaign. So in the past, right, you would set up different filters and you segment your audience as best you could. And sometimes you performed well. Maybe you had a 20, 30, maybe even 40% open rate. And maybe you had a click to open rate of somewhere in the, 4%, 3% if you were doing, really, really, really well. Utilizing AI to create like propensity models, right, with your data teams now brings things in much closer, so that you can actually do like A/B testing and then figure out what's going to work. And so what we saw over time in a lot of testing, lots of testing, is that when we're utilizing the AI models versus your typical, segmentation and filters, that we would see, let's say on an open rate, again, using simple information, an open rate anywhere from like 15 to 20% increase. And then on a click to open rate, anywhere from like 3 to 6x as far as click to open rate. And then that follows down as far as the funnel is concerned to conversion. So it can really, really make a difference. And when you're starting off, you really need to start off with one, these are kind of these nuggets, right? Is understand what data is available, what the platforms are, and what is actually going to move the needle, right? I mean, if you're still looking at impressions and thinking impressions is going to solve the world for you, you're not doing your business justice.
Well, so that maybe leads into this question, which is, what are the mistakes that you see marketers making when it comes to AI? I mean, it seems like, especially now, there's kind of a gold rush on new AI technologies and platforms, and there's a million new things coming onto the market. We're trying to hybrid those or mix those with the old way of doing things and trying to figure out what works. To your point about impressions, for a while that was the metric. Everybody was excited about an impression, and now it's just kind of nothing. And so, so can you talk about sort of the mistakes that you've seen people making, and then how you're overcoming them, either in your business or as you're seeing the industry change? What
Absolutely.
changes look like?
Yeah, and if you're in marketing and you're pushing the needle, you're going to make mistakes. I made mistakes, but you can't be afraid to make those mistakes, because you're going to learn from them. One of the things early on is you like a campaign, right? It fits with your overall strategy. It feels good. It looks good internally within your company, whether that's 2 people in your company or 10,000 or more. The people like it, right? The C-suite likes it, the sales team likes it, etc. But if it's not performing data-wise, don't marry to it, right? You have to be flexible enough, and you have to be able to pivot, and you need to go in eyes wide open, where you're talking to these teams that are decision makers and saying, we're going to test this, right? We know everyone likes it. It's great, right? But we need to test it. And if the testing, we're doing the right testing, is not working, we need to be honest with ourselves and be able to move forward from there. That is probably the most difficult thing in corporate America, is to not get married to campaigns that are not working.
I recently had a conversation with a coworker, and we were talking about like the '90s marketing campaigns on TV, and how they would put different phone numbers on their ads so they could track what station the person was listening to, what time they called, what time, oh, he called this number, so it meant it was on this station, this demographic, and they could actually hone in the demographics of the people who were calling and see which one performed better. And then they knew where to focus their ad dollars. And nowadays, that same thing would come into play with like your Google ads or your Meta and all that stuff. But the fact that they used to have different phone numbers so they could track the data on who's calling so they could assign it to that campaign, that just was kind of like an eye opener to me that they even did that in the first place. And then how cool it actually cool or whatever you think of it might be scary to some people, but for me, I nerd out to that stuff. I think it's cool that they have the different numbers so they know who's calling, so they can figure out the niche demographic on that. So I'm sure it's a night and day difference now, and you can get to very fine meta levels of, oh, he clicked on this before he clicked on this, and he clicked on that. So can you maybe break down some of the techniques that are used for that purpose?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so nowadays, because you can connect to a brand in so many different ways that it's very difficult to look at kind of the old models, right? So say kind of last touch or first touch. You have to really look at it from a multi-attribution standpoint. So you need to look at it in terms of, okay, what's happening in your prospect or existing customer's journey with your brand? What is occurring? Because you need to understand the path of the different types of campaigns and the different platforms that they're going to hit to be able to figure out actually what's driving it. So I mean, that's the first thing is you need to be able to separate it and you need to be able to track independently these platforms and then combined into typically a dashboard, which is going to be obviously a little bit more sophisticated. And that's going to be where your CRMs come into play, your Salesforce, your Microsoft Dynamics. But the tools are there. The multi-attribution is not something where you just open a book one day and figure it out, go on the website and you figure it out. It takes time, but that's really where you're going to get the help you need, because if you focus and say, oh, somebody clicked on a Google ad, well, what else did they do? Did they click on a social ad just before that? Did they see a streaming ad? Did they go to an event? So it's not it's very difficult to do a narrow focus as far as ROI is concerned. You have to look at more of a multi-attribution model.
Yeah, makes sense.
So one of the things that is sort of going on right now in the world, I mean, you mentioned AI, and obviously it's on the tip of everybody's tongue right now. But I have sort of this, I don't know, I think it's an optimistic view, which is that, AI is not going to, it's going to change everything, but there's still like a good world for us. And what I think ends up happening is I use this image and it's in my head of sort of this post-apocalyptic Tokyo or whatever, where every screen, every piece of glass or whatever is a video screen, and it's just totally inundated with stuff. And then at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the old guy slinging ramen on the corner, and so it's sort of that human experience in the sea of just nothing. And for somebody like you who specializes in, environmental stuff or brand activations or events, things like this that are human experiences, I think that those things might actually become more important in the future, than less important. Maybe they always were, but I think that they'll become a bigger piece of people's lives because we're going to be looking for that stuff. I think the world will get real noisy with just AI stuff, and it'll be real refreshing to come across a real live human experience. So I know you've worked with a lot of the big dogs. You worked with my Chargers, with my favorite car brand, Porsche, Beach Life. We know somebody else that worked on Beach Life that's been on the show before. So, I mean, we have some familiarity with these things. But can you talk a little bit about just, I guess, turning events into stories? And we kind of touched on this with like Drive to Survive and how F1 has taken racing and turned it into a drama on TV, right? They turned something into a real story, and that increased buy-in. And so can you talk about it in your own experience, whether it's with your own clients or just case studies that you're aware of, that you can sort of talk to us about, taking an event and turning it into a story that actually drives the future engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key is that, even if it's an event, there is a story behind it. And it's how are you creating interest and starting momentum before the event even occurs. So when I was doing work with the Chargers, which they had literally a great corporate team to work with, when I was with Pacific Mirror Bank and we were the official bank of the Chargers. It all started with, obviously we had a multi-year agreement. So anything that we were doing, we weren't looking at it as a one and done. We were looking at it as how are we going to start telling the story, right? And then build upon it so that it's evergreen. Everything that we talked about was evergreen. And I think that's key. So the starting point is figuring out ahead of time is how are you going to start to promote, if you will, seed, right? Create a little bit of sizzle for your audience, and then why are they actually going to care? And then how do you build up momentum to that, let's say a specific event, right? Where it's kind of like the big piece that you're going to really be able to amplify. And then from there, once that event occurs, immediately after, what are you moving forward with? And that takes planning. That's not planning, you do your event and then you figure out what you're doing next. You got to do that way ahead of time so that you have that evergreen effect. Because if you're hitting the right chord with an audience, they're going to be looking for more. And you need to be able to deliver that. You need to be able to fuel that interest. So momentum in brands is incredibly important. So that planning stage is critical. You obviously need to plan to figure out from your brand what's going to match with your own overall strategy, and then what's going to be matching with your partner. So in this case, we had a bank and we had a football team, right? The matches there was an incredible amount of exposure for us as a bank, but at the same time, the Chargers were our client and we were their client, which is the perfect mix, right? We were their bank, and we were their sponsor. So that piece of it is incredibly important to be able to figure out, from a sports perspective, is that pre-planning and how are you carrying it through? And as we talked about earlier, what metrics are you tracking to figure out, what's actually pulling through?
So these are some pretty big names, like the Galaxy, the Chargers, Luft 10, Anaheim Ducks. I'm sure a lot of that connection came because you worked through the bank, but how do you go about approaching a client like that and trying to get their business? I mean, it's one thing if they come to you, but I doubt all four of them came to you. You had to probably go out and acquire them. Is there like techniques that you could maybe share with us about going after the whales?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of it breaks down to who's the audience of that, specific, whether, whatever the brand is that you're looking to partner with, who's their audience. And then also what is their problem, right? What are they not able to do? Because when you look from the outside, you're like, wow, these are great brands. It's, the Chargers with 00 Nation, we worked with Xbox and we worked with Coke. So you look at these brands and you're like, they don't need any help. Well, no, they do. They do. And so as an example, I'll take an example more recently from 00 Nation, right? So when you're working with the likes of an Xbox, you're working with Coke or HP, they have a lot of products that they're looking to sell, right? And create brand awareness from. That's youth culture. And so from an audience perspective, their problem and our solution was penetrating youth culture, which is very fragmented and very difficult to attain and be able to hold from a brand standpoint. So no matter the size of the brand, there's typically going to be an area where they're having a problem. And I approach it from saying a problem because then we have a solution, right? I want to sugarcoat it. We want to have honest conversation in terms of being able to connect with the brand and be able to figure out, what are their issues. So in terms of those connections, we use everything that we have available. We have personal connections. We might be doing, cold intros even via LinkedIn, or we might be inviting brands to other events so they can experience and see what it could be like if their brand was integrated, which is a big deal. We could even utilize, product placement within specific videos that we're running just so they could see how the brand could be showcased, right? It's low cost to us. It's low cost to us, but it can have a big impact.
Very true.
Yeah. Like we were talking about a few minutes ago, I think that, as time progresses, we're going to find things need to be more and more human to sort of work. And I think that, you kind of alluded to it there, but like there's a little bit of a human element here, especially like dealing with young kids, for example. If you can win them as a young kid, they'll stay with you. I mean, I still use PlayStation after having a dozen PlayStations because I've always had PlayStation.
Yeah.
Right. So as a young person, when it mattered to me, they were the platform that I chose, and I've just ridden it out with them. I never even looked at an Xbox. But, so it's funny how, and I'm not like a big gamer or anything, but even my little bit of gaming, that was some Affinity I picked early on,
Well,
where you
that's
see it in
another funny
music a
part,
lot, right?
The
Yeah.
funny part is I use PlayStation too because you used PlayStation. So it's that
Yeah.
same kind of, like, yeah,
Yep.
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's not wrong. Well, and and then you see the same thing in music, like if you grew up on Aerosmith or something, like, it was a big deal to see Aerosmith all the way into your 50s and 60s. You're still watching Aerosmith because it brought a sort of, I guess, an emotional connection, or there's something deeper than just like, I need to buy your widget. And so, and you've heard people talk about these ideas like Thousand True Fans and stuff like this. But at the end of the day, what it seems like actually works or is the most effective thing is developing a true affinity for a brand or for a product or whatever it is. I mean, you mentioned Louvre 10 or the Porsche connection there. I love Porsches, but like people who love Porsches are big Porsche people, and they'll buy every Porsche, and they care about everything that Porsche sells, and they care about, it's like, but it's more than that. It's the community, it's the people they hang around, it's the events that get put together, it's all these things. And that makes this comprehensive photo that ends up turning you into a good customer for them. But at the same time, the reason you're a good customer for them is because of all this infrastructure. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just sort of the role of community and philanthropy and stuff like that in your world today as you're doing marketing on events like this or creating these brand activations. It just seems like the days of sort of the superficial, let me trick you into buying something are sort of, in their death throes, and there'll always be some things like that, maybe where, you fall for a TikTok ad or something. But it seems like for the big brands, the people spend real money with the things that they really have actual affinity for. And that, like we say, it comes through, a good product, sure. But, everything else that surrounds that, the community, the people, whatever else.
Yeah, it's key. I mean, exactly on point, Ryan. So the community, if you're building a community, I think your example with, like, as an example, Aerosmith is interesting because, whether it is music or whether it is, theater, films, they created brands, whether people in the general public know or not, right? Those are brands that are starting off, and most of them have some type of plan. And that plan really develops when they get larger and larger, like Aerosmith or U2. And obviously the names can go on and on, but they're creating a brand, they're creating a community, right? Of, essentially people who like their music. So it's like minded, right? The buzzword, like minded individuals. To be able to create a community, your point on Porsche is well taken. I mean, this is a brand that has done marketing as far as a auto manufacturer like no one else. I mean, they have the Porsche Club of America as an example, which has, I think, over 100,000 members, if not more, right? And they're waiting every time there is an event that they can get involved with as far as Porsche, or can they buy the Porsche gear, or to your point, what's the next Porsche car coming out? Because it's the way that they feel when they're connected to the brand, and that's the community aspect. So taking that to a little bit of a smaller world as far as cars are concerned. So in working with Fastlane Drive, right? So I mentioned we have 23 chapters. It's a very exclusive environment, but really it is a lot about community. And we'll get into philanthropy in a second, but the community aspect of, you've got a chapter in Los Angeles and it's got 100 or 150 members, but it's people who are interested in a backdrop as far as exotic cars. They love driving them. They love everything about them. But then there's also like the social networking, the business networking, and the philanthropy. So it's kind of like those three pillars. And that's what makes people feel good and allegiant, right, to things, is things that they can get involved with that are with people. As you talked about earlier, obviously sports is a key. And I think you're right on the money that the human experience is going to become, and has become, more and more valuable along the way. And I think the true test was COVID, right? COVID shut everything down. If people didn't really have an interest in being with other people and seeing exciting sports and other type of entertainment, it would have never come back. But it's come back like, tenfold in terms of what it was before COVID. And that proves the point that people are, we're social by nature. And so whether that's social coming through a screen or that social on site, that's what people are enjoying. And that's where brands really need to figure out what they're doing in that space to really take it to the next level, and to be consistent and be aligned with who their audience is, or who the audience is that they're looking to go after.
Yeah. It's funny. I just recently did lighting for a concert the other day for a Grateful Dead tribute show. And speaking of communities, the Grateful Dead has built a community of followers around the world that will. They're playing at the Sphere. We're coming from Japan to watch Grateful Dead. You know, like that. That's just
Yeah.
the kind of following and the fan base that they have. And I didn't realize how like big they were. They were kind of underground to me. I was never into that world or that music, but watching the talking to people at the show and the people who this is like the second or third time I've done lighting for these guys, and like their fan base can literally like, oh, I was at this show on this day at this time and know it to a T. This like they just they're such loyal customers of that band, and same thing with Aerosmith and all these big names. It's funny how like you can really develop your own community of like-minded people, and Ryan always mentions 1,000 true fans can support a business. You know, and it doesn't have to be 1,000,000 people, 1,000 true people that actually like what you do and follow you because of that. And I think this goes back to the Red Bull thing too. Like it's the showing support to the people who matter versus we're here, we got the Super Bowl ad, we have this huge budget. If you like it, cool. If not, no big deal. I love the people that kind of take it to that macro level and take it to the true fans. I don't know. I just I had to say something about that because you brought up the Aerosmith and that world of just like creating the community. Have you done events like that? Have you kind of like worked in that world of like I don't know how to say it. Do you know what I'm saying? Kind of have you built
Or
communities
in
like
the
that? F1's one of
experiential.
them. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I'll take again, kind of from a grassroots standpoint, Fast Lane Drive. So we're creating events, and we probably have anywhere from 20 to 30 events a month. So once you're a member of Fast Lane Drive in a specific chapter, let's say Orange County or San Diego or Monaco or wherever, you're a member of all of the chapters. These folks typically are like high net worth, ultra high net worth. They have some amazing vehicles. They've got everything from McLarens to Lamborghinis to Bugattis to Koenigsegg's, right?
mm-hmm.
And a lot of them travel around the world. So what we do is we look at it and say, this is our passion. This is your passion, right? How do we bring it together? And how do we create very unique, curated experiences that you're going to be interested in, right? Because it's not about the money, right? They have money to do anything that they want to do. It's
Yeah,
about creating unique experiences and access that they may not normally have with the group of people that they're going to be able to have fun with, right?
yeah,
People are looking for enjoyment, not just enjoyment from things, but enjoyment in terms of interacting with people. And I think that's a difference in terms of being able to say, yes, we're developing a brand that's very unique, that's very loyal, versus, hey, you know what? We're just going to plaster a logo here in the stadium, or we're just going to have this Super Bowl ad, right? That's a very kind of short-minded, small-minded, if you will, way to look at brand is I'm just putting logos. And it still happens today, right?
mm-hmm.
You have to look at it as like, what is the 360 as far as your brand is concerned, and how is it connecting with your audience on a regular basis, and meeting them where they want to be met, whether it's physical experiences, digital experiences, or a combination.
Yeah, I think
For
that's
sure.
a good point of view because I think there's so many things that are just kind of done for the sake of doing them, where a brand or
Yep.
something has sort of lost that connection with people, or maybe don't care at all, or don't know, or misunderstand, whatever it is. If I'm trying to be charitable, but they're doing things that that maybe don't actually connect, and then they're sitting and asking themselves, well, how come nobody's coming to our thing, or how come we're not getting enough tickets sold, or how come we're not doing whatever, and and the point is exactly what you just said. It's actually tapping into the needs or the interests of your audience, and obviously we do that in a digital way with digital marketing these days, but it's at the end of the day, I think it's kind of the core truth of marketing, right? So it's interesting how many people start to lose that vision, especially as you scale and it gets harder and harder maybe to reach out to the individual. So I love that. To that end, if you had to start, a lot of people talk about what would you tell your younger self or whatever, so if you had to start over marketing today, how would you get started or what would you do differently?
Yeah. So, I mean, today there's so much more information that's readily accessible. We were talking earlier about just understanding data. So, in marketing, really in business, because I'll just speak to the philanthropy side and they'll connect up here. So, I'm also on the board of Junior Achievement, which is a national, international nonprofit that focuses on financial education, career readiness, and entrepreneurship. Right. So, it's exactly what we're talking about. And one of the things that's really important is really understanding what it is you're going to need in business. So marketing. So what I would tell my younger self is making sure that you're taking marketing classes, making sure that you're taking business law or contract classes, you're taking finance, right? You're really understanding how business works, so that you're as moving forward. It's not that you're siloed, right, in a marketing role. Is that you understand the business side and how marketing supports the business side. Because if marketing is just supporting trying to brand, then you're going to miss it a lot. And that budget that you have as a marketer is going to start to run out. You need to make sure that you're focusing on performance at the same time that you're focusing on brand development.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. That's really a great point, because I think a lot of people, especially if you just kind of go the traditional route and you go to school to become a marketer, they might touch on some business concepts and things like that, but they're definitely not getting deep into the weeds about financial education or any of that kind of stuff. So you come out of school kind of idealistic and you're ready to just, take the world on, and I'm just going to be the best dang Google ad buyer of all time. And but if you can't actually tie those back to metrics that matter to the business, then ultimately you're not going to have a budget in the future.
Yeah.
So it's that's a really great point.
Yeah. And I think it's key also, as you're coming into marketing when you're younger, right? There's generally two routes you can take. Like you could take the agency route where you're gonna work with a multitude of different clients, and sometimes that's really good and great exposure. And other times you're gonna, let's say, work on the client side where you're gonna focus on one brand, or maybe the brand has a few in the family, if you will. But the thing to realize when you're young as a marketer is you want to really get as much experience as possible, and you need to listen to yourself, not the company that you're working for, in terms of your own career. Your career is your own, your brand is your own. You need to develop that personal brand from day one. And when I say day one, I really mean high school. You really need to develop that brand in high school, who you are, who you want to reach out to, who you want to be, so to speak, when you grow up. And that networking aspect, whether it's physical or digital, is critical. And so when you go into and you become, let's say, a member of an agency, or you're on the client side, if you start off and maybe you're starting off in paid media, that's great. But guess what? You need to learn about what that paid media is for. What's the business? How is the business actually generating revenue? This is an interesting question that I come into contact with sometimes young marketers and sometimes experienced marketers who don't really have an idea of how the business works. I mean, they understand in terms of what the company, so to speak, sells, but they don't understand exactly how it works behind the scenes. And when you understand that, you're going to become a better marketer.
Yeah, it's one of these things. I kind of touch on it a fair bit, but I suspect that the people who survive in sort of marketing and things like that, as AI ramps up and people can do more with less, are going to be the folks that have a point of view or an opinion or a way of seeing the world that is somehow unique or different or better. And so, to your point about sort of personal branding, it's developing those things, through education and through work experience and through whatever else, and getting to a point where you can actually offer that, and you may be able to reflect back on that, just given that you're a consultant in marketing now. I mean, clearly people come to you for your point of view. The tactics might be the same or whatever, but you're adding some special sauce that's uniquely you, that is that personal brand aspect, or whatever we want to call it. And so that's been a little bit of the advice I've been giving younger people, especially like I work around a lot of designers and artists and stuff, is it's like, it can't just be like, we're not going to make a fortune selling production art in the future. Somebody's going to, have some AI robot that's doing that kind of low level work. But the person who's actually designing the strategy or coming with the point of view that is unique or interesting or a hot take or whatever, that person I think will survive longer. Now I don't know if it'll ultimately be replaced one day, or we'll have to build our own AI bots or what it is. But I think at the end of the day, people are going to work with people that they like and they trust. And I think that if you have a good point of view or perspective and you're adding value, you'll always find a home.
Yeah, no, to your point, Ryan, I mean, an opinion is important. If you're sitting back as a taskmaster, as a marketer, whatever level you are, if you're a taskmaster, if you're actually creating things, it's going to be difficult to survive in the future, because all of that project management, taskmaster, individual tasks, whatever it is, whether you're creating content, whether you're doing design, even aspects of strategy. You need to look at it in terms of you're leading, not following, and utilizing AI as at this point, utilizing AI as an assistant and really looking at it as an assistant. How can this make me more efficient? How can I deliver quicker with quality and accuracy to make my job or the group and the team that I'm working with, better? So one of the things that we looked at with our teams is, and it harkens actually back to a conference I was at a couple of years ago, and the person said it perfectly, is look at your workflow as a marketer and then figure out where AI is going to help in that workflow, not as a side piece, but integrate it into your workflow. And you're going to need to test it. And you're going to need to do all of the QC and all of those aspects, whether we're doing it from a design perspective, whether you're doing it from a data modeling perspective. You need to make sure that how are you going to figure out what's going to work in your workflow? And then is it helping you be more efficient and be comfortable with testing and making mistakes along the way, as long as you're learning from it and improving, that entire time.
Yeah. Nope, I think that's true. And I think, especially with AI, especially right now, we're in this weird transition where AI is just kind of coming online, and, we're very early stage in that. And I think right now we still will sort of rely on the intelligence or the knowledge of people who've been doing it for some time, because it is easy for AI to kind of, smoke screen you or make you feel like it's doing something productive, even if it's not. So I like your idea of using it as an assistant, not necessarily as a replacement. And I think, it's going to be it feels like it's happening really fast, but I think ultimately it's going to take some time before big companies and these big behemoths can hand everything off to robots. It may happen eventually, but I think we've got a little runway left on that. And I think in that time is where you need to be developing your point of view, your takes, your ways of doing things that are creative and unique. I mean, at least as AI works today, it's not really doing a lot of generating new stuff. It's sort of compiling the world's knowledge, right? And so for people who are still on the cutting edge of things, or who can offer a unique perspective, that might get trained into the AI for the next round. But right now you can still, provide hot takes. And so I think it's just, all the more important that we do that stuff and that we don't fully hand over to these tools. Because I think there's also a generation of kids that are coming into AI that are going, oh, well, AI can just do my job, and then I can spend more time on Pokemon Go or whatever's going on today. And, and so it seems like there's a little bit of that happening where it's this, completely handing over trust to these tools. And I think without sort of some of that fundamental stuff, we're going to end up in real trouble. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about that. Sort of, we're getting to the end here, but if you talk a little bit about just sort of what's worked in marketing that still works today, that, even though the world has evolved and everything's changed so much and technology has empowered us in so many new ways, and there's so many exciting things on the precipice, what are sort of just the marketing truths? And I think we've touched on some of these things, but just to sort of put a button on, or maybe it's hope, providing people with hope that there's still going to be a career in marketing waiting for them, if they're getting ready to start school or whatever.
Yeah. So let me take it like first from the kind of the education side. So we talked a lot about making sure you understand the business side, making sure you're building your personal brand. Those things work for sure. And it really starts with yourself, and then figuring out exactly, the businesses and interests that you have. From a marketing standpoint, there's a lot of things that are moving quickly as far as technology is concerned. As an example, right, paid media still works, but then you got to look at what is actually happening at the same time as far as AI. When I'm talking about AI, I mean in the sense of search, right? So if you compare like a Chat GPT to Google on the paid media side, right? So I mean, Chat GPT can easily and probably will adjust its business model, right, to be able to take in revenue, and they're already obviously garnering a huge audience away from Google as far as the ways that people are utilizing ChatGPT, whether people are utilizing it as a simple thing for creating a recipe, or they're utilizing it for, creating and helping to develop a dynamic strategy. So the things that work still, to our point earlier, in-person experiences work, but you need to know your audience. You can't just spend money because you think you need to be somewhere. You need to have a plan going in and figuring out how we're going to create something that's experiential, that we're going to be able to actually capture data. So if you're going to be able to harness, a physical event, or a series of events, or a series of activities and engagements, activations, if you will. Make sure that you're understanding what type of data that you can capture. Make sure you're understanding what the legality is and regulations are around that, generally speaking, as well as industry specific. But those things can work, and you need to have a plan going in all the way through and then moving past it as well, so that it is that full 360 as opposed to guesswork and a bunch of projections on what could potentially work. Is you need to have a plan going in, you need to harness the data, and you need to make sense of it, and you need to be able to test.
Yep, I think that's right. Like they say, hope is not a strategy. So,
Hope's
so
not a
here we
plan.
are. Yeah, right. So here we are kind of at the end. Maybe just quickly before we get out of here, I wondered if you'd talk just briefly about what's next for you, personally, professionally, what are you jacked about? And then follow that up with maybe just kind of where people can track you down, how they can get involved, and if they're interested with in working with you or reaching out for whatever reason, how they could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's perfect. So for me, I'm continuing to do marketing consulting, working with financial services companies, action sports, doing big development as far as fast lane drive on a local basis here in Southern California, which has been super exciting. I mean, you kind of think about, we do experiences where we do, as an example, drives, right? Where we've got, 30, 50, potentially 100 cars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Porsches, McLarens, doing canyon drives, or, it's pretty phenomenal. And then that group together from business networking as well as philanthropy side is pretty tremendous. So that's super exciting for me. That's always been a passion of mine. And it all includes marketing as far as my inroads into it. You can find me primarily on LinkedIn. I do a lot on LinkedIn. So Ondar Tarlow on LinkedIn. I'm always sharing, nuggets of information, whether it is from a brand perspective, whether it is AI, performance, whatever will be tools that can help people. That is what I'm pushing forward. And that is also what I look to continue to learn more. There really are no experts, especially in the area of AI. If somebody's purporting to be an expert, that's probably your first red flag. We're all really here to learn. And I would always say is follow what you're very much interested in and figure out how you can make a business around it.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I know our listeners will as well. So appreciate it.
Yeah,
no,
thanks so much,
wonderful,
Ondar.
Mike. Yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much to our guest, Mike, and to everybody who tunes in the show this week and every week. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
This is a perfect